episode of Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me, as always, is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you today, Chris?
Hello. I'm doing very well.
Bonus.
How about yourself, Jody?
You
good?
Mostly good, yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Well, we got a lot to get to today, so let's ignore the pleasantries and dive right in. We're going to talk about some mixing strategies.
Yep.
And when we're receiving tracks, or I guess technically our own tracks, and how to approach those, because we can narrow mixes down or songs down into 4 general categories.
4 of them, huh?
4 of them, yes.
But for mixes you're talking about.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Or, I mean, we get tracks and that how they have a tendency to be a certain way. Okay. It will make more sense when I say the categories that we're going to have here. So we're going to deal with 2 today, or else we'll be here all day. So we'll probably do another one later. We're going to start talking about underproduced tracks or overproduced tracks today.
Okay.
The other ones that we're leaving out today are going to be poorly recorded or pristinely recorded, but we'll touch on those at a later date.
Of course.
So what are we considering when we're receiving these, or what should our first sort of port of call be when we listen to tracks, presumably for the first time?
When you throw all the faders to 0 and you just play it back?
Yeah.
Listening for whether it's underproduced or overproduced, I think that's kind of a relatively easy one to understand off the top. If you're given 168 tracks of things to deal with for a mix, that's kind of a lot of stuff right there. Could be overproduced.
Could be. Now, these terms that we're using here, obviously over or underproduced, have a little bit of a stigma to them. At least they do in my mind. It doesn't necessarily mean that one is better or necessarily even bad in either case. What I tend to think about, let's say, as far as like an underproduced track, it could still be a large track count, but not necessarily a lot of stuff is happening. It's basic parts. It could be help you, but it's like a drum groove going through the whole song without changing anything. Right. That's something that we obviously potentially going to have to deal with, right? Not a lot of changes arrangement-wise. It's like there's very little interest to kind of drive the song forward, not clearly defined parts, perhaps.
Sure.
As in like verse or chorus or whatever. That means that we have to kind of deal with those differently than if we have everything in the kitchen sink, obviously.
I don't disagree with that. Have you ever been accused of being overproduced yourself?
I don't recall, but it's always a pet peeve for me when people say that, oh, this is overproduced.
Okay. What about underproduced?
I don't hear that as often. It's more like
your middle of the road.
Well, yeah. I mean, I tend to notice things. I think actually, if you as a mix engineer deal with those situations appropriately, people don't notice. Hopefully, we can give some tips on how we would do that today.
Sure.
Underproduced. I mean, it could be. I'm thinking of a song that was part of a TV show, and was a band called the Big Pink. They had a song called Dominoes. It's this sort of gritty track, and it's hooky as all hell. If you haven't heard it, go listen to it. It's a pretty cool track. If you listen to the structure of it, there's not a whole lot of stuff going on. That would be one thing that I would sort of call into that underproduced category.
Okay.
Doesn't make it bad, but it's simple, right? It just works. So,
right.
Have you been called that? Because I don't think you have ever been. I doubt that you've been called underproduced. Overproduced, possibly. But.
Yeah. I've had accusations of being overproduced. In fact, one of my favorite comments is, "What is that, flying cars?"
Yeah, you like to say that. Yeah.
That's like my favorite quote of something that was said on a track from my first album, which is so bizarre. And maybe that was part of the reason for another album that I did later that was literally just acoustic guitar and vocal for a vast majority of it.
Oh, so like a palate cleanse.
Palate cleanse, sure.
Yeah.
I've never been called underproduced, I don't think. Raw, for sure, but not necessarily underproduced. And the overproduced thing only came like once or twice. It's not a common thing that I've heard.
My answer has always been to that overproduced thing. When people say, oh, they're just overproduced. I was like, what does that mean? That they sound too good? It's like, because to me, it's like when something's been produced, it's been developed, and it just sounds good. I'd
Well,
say, I think it's something that you might hear a lot to like Mutt Lang productions, but then again, he
he's
also did,
very anal, and
yes,
everything is perfectly placed in its spot and generally in tune.
right. But, to those people, they might not even think that or remember even that he did a bunch of AC/DC records. I don't think anybody would call like Back in Black overproduced.
No, but it sure sounds good.
It sure does. Absolutely. It certainly does. But let's get back to underproduced here, right?
Sure.
So do you have any examples that you think that when you hear that song, you think, oh, that could fall under that category? I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
There is a live show that I saw of Prince. I don't remember the name of the song off the top of my head, but it was literally a drum loop for the entire thing that didn't change. And I believe it was maybe a 2-chord chord progression. So there's not a lot going on with the chord progression. But the way that he performed it live and the value that he gave his vocals between the parts is what set it apart. So it was very, very sparse and very intimate for that reason. And while a lot of people might think, well, if it's just a couple of things and it's not a lot to produce there. However, with him doing what he does and sometimes stopping the chord progression and sometimes silencing the drum loop and then changing the way he's actually singing, you get the full value of what's changing from part to part. And that being said, that can translate to the studio environment and still keep something that is very minimal and possibly raw, still very unique and not necessarily underproduced. And in comparing that to a live performance I just saw last week of a couple of friends of mine, where they're singer-songwriter types, as good as they are as actual singers, the performances left a lot to be desired because there was not giant change or even significant change or even subtle change between verse and chorus. And it's like, which part is my verse now? Which part is my chorus? What am I trying to pay attention to? Why does it feel like you're just there and I'm not feeling a flow? That doesn't translate well to a studio performance if the live performance isn't even giving you that. You can add and subtract stuff, but that's where someone needs to come in from the outside and say, listen, you need to shake things up a little bit here or there to get this to not be boring. And to me, when your song is boring, it doesn't matter how produced it is, it's still boring. And that's a subjective matter, but
you have to then either, let's say that you're a mix engineer or if the producer hasn't really caught this, or maybe it's a self-produced thing where there hasn't been any outside influence or opinion to say like, yeah, you know what? I love that chord progression, but I don't need it for 3 minutes, if nothing is happening to it. Let's say that we get a song with tracks like this, though. You're pulling up and you notice like, okay, there's not a whole lot going on here. What should we do to kind of bring in some interest to that? Or at least to make this sound like a good song, right? Sonically and hopefully arrangement-wise as well.
Well, as the mix engineer and putting my mix engineer cap on, I'm going to want to have a conversation with either the artist and or the producer. And the reason being is I want to know how much leeway I'm going to get on being able to make what might be radical mix choices to the end result to get that interest to come back. Meaning, do I get to mute the guitar parts? Do I get to mute the drum tracks? Do I get to mute, if there's a bass? Do I get to mute vocals that may not be necessary? Do I get to mute any of the instruments that I've been given so that I can pull things in and I can drop things out to create some sense of movement of build up and breakdown to give the sense of flow to the song.
Yeah, and that's something you mentioned that with Prince, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where
he does that extremely well.
Right, and you go into a chorus. Let's say that, okay, now there's the bar before that, if it works with a melody or whatever, that the groove might drop out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's there, and then you have that sort of pregnant pause where it's like, something is happening. And then the same groove can come back in again, but now you have a sort of sense of renewal that something has happened.
Yeah.
Right? That would be my first protocol as well. It's like, well, what can I get rid of? If you only have like 2 tracks, let's say that there's a Ed Sheeran style song where there's an acoustic guitar and there's a drum machine, right? Mm-hmm. These are the things we probably have to play a little bit with the groove there to kind of make that interesting. But the other thing that I think as well as I'm doing here, I'm putting on my mix engineer hat, is I want to make those few elements that might be there sound really, really good. Now that sounds obvious, but maximize what is there and make sure that we hear everything as cleanly as we want to, or rather as appropriately as we want to.
Okay.
Right? Make those kind of grooves sit where they have room, or maybe add some subtle automation in the chorus or what have you. That would be my first thing. But then also depending on how much space there will be in the mix. Here's where we can get like really creative with our reverbs and delays possibly, right? If there is a lot of open space, we can pay attention to the detail work. You know, you and I, we all often talk about filtering effects returns, like are taking off the top end or the low end of the reverb. And maybe we can even get creative here with, in one part of the song, we have more reverb than in the chorus or whatever. Again, just to add movement, right?
Yes.
And delay throws on certain lines of the vocal, all those little things that we can do to kind of like add interest to it. Panning of it, having stuff move around, adding interest to parts that essentially aren't doing a whole lot. Right?
Yes.
To kind of give that kind of movement.
Mm-hmm. When you say you want to make it sound great, which is a phrase that you used in there, are you referring to the EQ, the compression, the cleanliness of the audio, the effects you might use, whether it be a phaser or a delay or a bit crusher or some kind of strange thing that is esoteric? What exactly is it that would determine something as sounding great?
It's a little bit of a bad word to use, though, isn't it?
But what there must be a reason behind it. So
yeah,
that's why I'm asking.
Right. I'm thinking primarily like compression and EQ.
Okay.
To make sure that serves presumably the lead vocal and whatever instrumentation is there. So I want to make those sound as good as they can. Let's say that we have a multitude of tracks, then we might not need to worry about whatever is clashing a little bit, because there's going to be clashes. But here, everything tends to be exposed. I want to make sure the vocal sounds awesome. Okay. I want to make sure that I'm using de-essing so that nothing is annoying and sort of distracting that way.
Gotcha. I just wanted to clarify that.
Sure. Yeah, no, but that's a good question, because what is great? Well, that's really subjective. And I guess a better word is sounding appropriate. But in my view, it's making it sound great in this case. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds like a winner answer right there.
Right.
The only reason why I mentioned that is that I can't remember the name of a movie, but it was only a few years ago, and I was staying through the end credits, as I tend to do. I like to read the end credits as best I can once there's a bazillion names flying by, right? But occasionally, I'll see somebody's name that I know, and I know that they worked on it. And it's like, hey, I know that person. So it's fun to read the credits in that regard. And there was a guitar and vocal song playing at the end of this movie that sounded like it was recorded on a boombox of all things. So the recording sounded lo-fi. But for the value of the movie and vibe that was being done there, that was appropriate.
Sure.
Now, was it recorded that way? I have no idea. I didn't do any research into it. I didn't care. And that's a bad answer on Jody's part to say he didn't care, because normally I'm very much attuned to the quality of what the audio sounds like. And I'm rather anal myself of wanting things to sound good. And
I would say hold that thought, because we might be covering that when we get into poorly recorded.
Right. No, and
categories, right?
That's a different category.
Right. Let's flip the coin here then. Now you get, air quotes here, an overproduced track to mix.
Sure.
To me, what qualifies as an overproduced, it's a gazillion parts, right? It could be different instrumentation, doing different lines, doing harmonies on top of things, and counterpoint melodies, that type of stuff going on all over the place, right? There could be lots of changes, like arrangement-wise. We're going to have everything in the kitchen sink, like I like to say, like it sounds like a Vegas casino. Right? and now you have 150 tracks to kind of mix, and you have to somehow make this work and sound like an absolute banger.
Do you have an example of an overproduced track?
Yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant to say this because I don't necessarily agree with the term overproduced in a bad way.
Okay.
So let me say that as a cop-out. But let's say that you get something like Sowing the Seeds of Love by Tears for Fears to mix. That's going to be a completely different skill set and mindset as opposed to if you're mixing the first Dre record. They're different mindsets. So we have to approach this with a different mindset. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of those type of things. Yes, or maybe like a Dream Theater thing or something.
There's definitely a lot of parts to a Dream Theater thing.
Right. Maybe not so much as in different instrumentation, because it tends to be just that, right? It tends to be the bass, guitar, and keys, right? That's what I'm thinking, you know?
Yeah, out of curiosity, are you aware of what the production was on Sowing the Seeds of Love and how many tracks that actually was?
I know it was a lot.
Really?
You know? Yeah.
Over 48?
Probably.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that was them tipping their hat to the Beatles, obviously, with that. Kind of like Sgt. Pepper type of thing. And it's definitely swinging for the fences, and you could hear it. So I'm a big Tears of Fears fan, so I love their stuff, but there's a lot of stuff going on there. And this is, of course, these are the days of analog. This is not Pro Tools.
Right. That's why I was asking, because generally speaking, when you get past 48 tracks, you were in a very rarefied studio situation at that time.
I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure that there were probably slave desks, or at least bouncing down to other tracks. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Sort of like Queen and making the tape almost disappear with how many overdubs.
Exactly.
They would do, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
For me, there's a recent example that I can use, and it's Trevor Rabin and his new song Big Mistakes off of his latest album. I like that kind of music. However, some of it is to the point of like, really? That's all I can say about it is like, really? Okay.
I like it too. I like it a lot, actually, but it's Trevor Rabin.
Yeah, you have to expect it from a guy like that.
Right. Yes, and all the composing he's done for movies and stuff. It's a different mindset coming from him. So you're probably very unlikely to get a 3-minute pop song from him.
Yeah.
And if you do, it's probably going to have a lot of odd turns and twists along the way. Right?
Okay, so now that we've made this distinction that generally speaking, an overproduced thing contains lots of parts, possibly tons of tracks and massive changes throughout the arrangement, what are you looking to do at this point with a mix?
Well, I hate to say it because this is something I do to myself a lot in my writing. Oh, let's throw more tracks at it. But it's what's the focal point at any given point in the track, right? Is it the vocal when the vocal is happening? And the answer is usually yes. All the guitar lines, it could be keyboard lines, it could be all sorts of pads and stuff. What is the most important part, or integral part, I should say, in that part of the song? And I tend to put my focus there first. If you can really make that shine and kind of decide that this is what's driving the car at this point. Have that be the main focal point. And then same kind of mindset as, if you're getting somebody else's tracks, you have to talk to the client and, again, ask for that freedom. It's like, well, can I remove stuff here?
Right.
Or is that the syncopated harp that you have in the second pre-chorus, is that really important to you? So removing things that might have seemed great at the time, as I raise my hand here, right, then getting rid of those. If they're simply not needed, they might not add that extra part or interest that you think. And just making those decisions first do a lot of the work for me.
Yeah.
What about you? I mean, I've seen your sessions. You have sessions that are,
Take a PhD to kind of look at.
Well, there's a lot of tracks a lot of times, right?
Sure.
So,
for me, when I'm throwing up all the tracks, much like if I'm listening to an quote unquote underproduced track compared to an overproduced track, I'm listening to hear the interaction between the parts. That's really the first order of business, because when you have a ton of instrumentation and pieces, parts to an arrangement that can climb upwards of over 120 tracks or whatnot, the puzzle pieces have to fit together well. Depending on how seasoned the composer or the songwriter and or producer are coming into this point, there may be parts that clash with each other. And as you mentioned, there needs to be a discussion. Is this clashing on purpose, or is this just poorly put together kind of thing? And
are you thinking now frequency-wise, or are you thinking like compositional-wise, where it's like,
both?
Yeah.
There can be clashes on both natures of that, and obviously we want to delve into some of that with the other categories from a future episode coming. The idea that I would look at, though, is, again, just as you said, how much can I remove? How much freedom do I have to mute, to pull things in and out at any given point? When it comes to the frequency area that you just were commenting on, that's not necessarily a question you need to have answered from the producer. That's more or less, is the low end getting too much? Do I need to start filtering with high-pass filters everywhere in order to get things to sit better? Is there too much high end? As I mentioned in an example prior to hitting record here with a mix that I'm like, there's too much high end on this. That's where you hit low pass filters on things to make sure the high end is not getting out of hand as well. Grouping of instrumentation can be a big thing here when you have lots of tracks to deal with. Are you putting all of the background vocals onto a singular bus channel to deal with all the EQ, or are you doing it individually and then doing something else? It has a lot to do with how each part really plays into it. You might not be using nearly as much reverb and or other special effects in a situation like that when you have so many parts going on, unless you're maybe doing shoegaze music or something, I don't know, where they use like gigantic hall reverbs on just about everything.
Yeah, because it's like, well, let's introduce more mud into this already dense mix, right? Because you're just not going to hear it, and you're doing yourself a disservice by doing that.
Right. And the other thing, too, is that it's going to take up a whole lot more of the stereo field. So I'm not just going to be panning things hard left, hard right, and center. I'm going to be using different degrees of the stereo spectrum to place things to give them their own little niche in the mix.
I would agree with that, because that's a good way of getting something to stand out and be noticeable, whether that's a percussion element or whatever. Like that probably doesn't need to be hard right, but if you pull it in a little bit, you actually hear it more, and it becomes a point of interest, assuming again that it's
supposed to be that.
Right. Yeah.
And the fun thing is, and just having finished doing a Dolby Atmos remix on an album, now you have a much larger field to work with.
Sure.
You can place things much more, I wouldn't call it efficiently, but it is definitely, you've got much more spectrum within to work in terms of placement of audio.
Sure. Yeah. I think the thing that gets me sort of the biggest help when I'm doing a mix like this is either the removal of parts, and also relatively judicious work of EQ, like you mentioned, because you don't have all that stuff building up in the low end that you might not notice. It's all that rumble, but you already have 2 synth basses and an electric bass and a kick drum to contend with. Don't be afraid to cut a little bit more from the low end that you normally might do. Just things like that anything to kind of make room for this gigantic soup of instruments that we now have to make sound good.
I don't disagree with that. And speaking of gigantic soups, let's move on to our Friday finds. Chris, what have you got this week?
Like I was kind of joking before we started recording here, I need another guitar amp sim, like I need a new hole in my head, right? But STL Tones have something they call the Tone Hub LE that is now available for free if you're an avid Pro Tools user. So that's something, if you do a lot of guitar work like I do, and you just want a new toy to play with. I love the STL Tone stuff. I don't have the Tone Hub, but I can download this now and play with it because I am a Pro Tools user these days. That is my pick for this Friday, Tone Hub LE for Pro Tools users, and it should be free in your account, so yay for you. What about you, Jody? What do you got?
I'm going with something meant for live rigs this week, and generally speaking, most likely guitar players. It is the Canvas Power HP by Walrus Audio. It doesn't really explain very well what it is other than the word power, but what it is it's a power supply for your pedal board that will power multiple foot pedals and amp modelers all at the same time on a single power source, which helps you to clean up your power for your sound, which should make it less noisy, which is a good thing. So I'm looking at the Canvas Power HP.
Nice.
Yeah. While we've got your attention, we ask that you go to Inside the Recording Studio and sign up for our email list. You'll want to make sure that you're on our email list so you don't miss any future episodes of this incredible podcast. And when you're on our email list, you're automatically entered for any future giveaways that we have. Send us an email at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the phrase over under, and you'll get something cool back in your inbox. If you have a topic or suggestion for Chris and I to explain in a future episode, contact us at the contact page and we'll put it into consideration for a future episode. With that, I'll say see you next week.
Talk to you later, Jody. Thanks for listening, everybody.